a seat. Pumped you guys are here today. I was worried no one would come. It's Father's Day. So if you're here, you get double credit for that. If you're watching online, that's normal. Sorry, half credit for you, but I'm just kidding. I hope you guys know I'm being sorry. There's no credit here. Do you know that? Okay. We'll learn about that today. Hey, before we jump in, I wanted to let you know something is coming down the pipe here. So the Blue Tip Parade is on Tuesday, and then we run at Kidsland at the Blue Tip Festival on Wednesday this week. Very exciting. If you've signed up to serve, man, I hope you have a sense of expectation of what God can do with that. I don't know if you heard in Bree's story over who just got baptized. She talked about one of her first interactions with Mosaic was at the Blue Tip. That's a crazy, it's almost like we planned that. We didn't, but how crazy is that to say that we just watched somebody get baptized too? One of their first interactions was at some of these outreaches. And then the following week on July 3rd, which is a Monday, they set off the fireworks here in Wadsworth, and we're gonna obviously have our doors open. We're gonna have inflatables out front, inflatables in here. It's gonna be crazy. So if you haven't signed up for that yet, we need you. And here's our thing. Just be honest with you, it's one of our kind of the way we think in July. That July 4th weekend is a crazy busy weekend for so many people. So what we're gonna do is on July 2nd, on that Sunday, we're gonna be online only. And here's our reasoning behind it. We have so many people that make Sunday morning go. We have worship team, we got tech team, we got kids, we got coffee, we got people saying hi as you come in the doors. There's so many people serving on a Sunday morning. So what we want to do is give them the gift of having a Sunday off so that we could ask everybody to turn around and serve on the 3rd, because we're going to have thousands of people coming into our building. So it's a bribe. It's a trade of sorts. So July 2nd, not next week, but the week after, we will be online only so that we can really get after being in our community and representing here. So keep that in mind. Don't come on the 2nd. I mean, you can just hang out outside because the doors will be locked. So, all right. So I want to start this morning. Can I point some out? It's just weird. Last week, second service, nobody was over here, and there was 3 people here, and there was a ton of people over here. Now you guys have gone and switched it up, and this side, there's not very many people, so I have to fix the way I thought about this in my brain. I guess I have to preach over here a little bit more today. All right, so this morning, I wanted to start by telling you about the greatest animated Disney movie of all time. That's the deep place we're starting today. Now, if you're sitting here wondering, why does Adam talk about Disney movies all the time? First of all, shut up. Second of all, I have a 13-year-old girl and a 3-year-old girl, so I have been watching Disney movies for the past decade. I mean, think about that. That's 10 years worth of mostly animated on my TV, okay? And what happened, and if you have kids, you don't just watch a movie one time. You watch it till your eyes bleed, and then you switch to the next one. So that's where I've been. And there's only so many ways you can stay sane while watching the same movies over and over again. So the way I cope is I start to analyze them. The plot, the themes, the questions, the answers, all that stuff. I really start to think about. I actually thought about starting a blog. Here's my analyzation of all the Disney movies, just because I was bored. I'm not going to, probably. But I've done a lot of thinking about this. I actually do have in my head this ranking of Disney movies. So it's not Frozen, just so you know. It's up there. Frozen's a good movie. I even like Frozen 2 now. After watching it 100 times, it started to grow on me. I really do actually like it. The ending's amazing. It's not Lion King. That's number 2. Lion King's epic. It's amazing. It's not Encanto. Love Encanto. Encanto's up there. That doorknob scene at the end, so good, right? It's not, contrary to what my wife would say, it's not Little Mermaid, because that's actually a terrible movie. Little Mermaid is a terrible movie. And I'm talking both of them. I haven't even seen the new one. I don't care. As a father, Little Mermaid's a terrible movie. Think about the message that Little Mermaid sends to people, disobey your dad and it'll all turn out really awesome. No, I don't like that movie. It's terrible. Terrible. My wife was offended by that because she really likes that, which makes me worried. Anyways, we won't talk about that. In my humble but right opinion, the greatest animated Disney movie of all time is Moana. Moana. Anybody with me? Okay. First service, they were like, okay. They were like, kind of okay. Like, I'm happy that some people were with me in this. Okay, so here's my reasoning. We'll get to the Bible in a minute. Shut up. Here's my reasoning. The movie has two like major themes, identity and purpose. And if you watch it like 100 times, you'll start to see this stuff pop out at you. Moana has an identity crisis. Maui has an identity crisis. Even the antagonist, the bad guy, the lava monster, Taka, has an identity crisis of sorts. So Moana is dealing with this struggle between wanting to be rooted on her island and this call to the sea. And she's got this pull in two directions. It's very like Moby Dick themes going on. It's deep stuff. And Maui has scars and failures of his past that cause him to be insecure. So he covers it up with bravado and false confidence. Ever heard of that before, right? Taka, the bad guy, she has had her heart stolen from her, and she is raging against the world because her heart has been stolen. I don't know. To me, those are pretty deep and relatable themes. Now, one of the best parts in the movie is right after Moana fails. She fails, Maui leaves her, he's a chicken, he runs. She's floating in the middle of the sea on a broken and battered ship. She is broken and battered, lots of symbolism going on. And then, she's about to quit. She's gonna be done with this whole mission that she's on. And her, okay, forgive me, Christians, her dead grandma shows up, and I know that's like theologically incorrect. There's a lot of stuff in there that's wrong, by the way. There's lava monsters, so it's all made up. We don't have to like freak out about all that stuff, right? Okay, cool. We are on the same page. So her dead grandma starts talking to her, and she says this line to her. And if you are watching the movie and you hear this line in the middle of this little speech and you don't like tear up, you're not human, because it is so moving. Her voice even cracks as she says it. It's just so powerful. So she's talking to Moana in this moment when she fails, and she says, Moana, you've come so far. Listen, do you know who you are? And to me, that's so powerful because I've been there before. I don't know about you, but I've been there before. When I fail, when I have things in my life that don't go the way I wanted to, and I'm kind of living in the mud pit of my own failure, two things tend to happen. One, I tend to forget how far I've come. I don't know about you, but I tend to zoom in on the failure, and I kind of ignore how far God has brought me in my life. And then two, questions of identity do start to sprout up. When I fail, that's when I ask, who am I? What does this mean about me? Like those two things. So I'm sitting here going, man, a Disney movie nailed observationally two things that tend to happen when we fail. And I don't know if you've been there before. When you fail, do you forget how far you've come? Do you forget how far God's brought you in your life? And do questions start to arise about who you are? So I want to ask the same question today. The question that actually serves as a turning point in the movie. Do you know who you are? And I like that too, by the way. I like that the whole movie kind of hinges on that question. Her whole story hinges on her ability to answer the question, do you know who you are? And I think that's true of you as well, that your whole story is going to hinge on your ability to answer that question. Your life is going to be kind of directed by your ability or inability to answer this question. This question is so important. I almost want to exaggerate the importance of this question. This, like who you think you are might be the most important thing about you. And I'm sort of like, it's theologically incorrect. Maybe. But listen, here's my reasoning. This is why I think it might be true, that this is the most important thing about you. I've said this before, but let me read it so I say it perfect. It's not who you are that determines your behavior. It's who you think you are that determines your behavior. It's not who you are, it's who you think you are. You see the difference here? That's a huge thing. Like, if that's true, that means that who you are it kind of plays a secondary role to who you think you are, and what plays out in your life. How you make decisions actually isn't dependent on who you are. It's more dependent on who you think you are. That your thoughts about yourself are so strong and powerful that they dictate a lot of the direction of your life. Proverbs 23:7, King James Version says, so as a man thinketh within himself, so he is. As a man thinketh, that means thinks. Didn't you know? So he is. The idea is that what's going on inside plays out on the outside. It's not who you are, it's who you think you are. And just by observation, you know this already, right? How many of you have a small dog that acts like a big dog? Anybody have that? Small dog that acts like a big dog, right? So you know that it's not how big the dog is, it's how big the dog thinks that the dog is that dictates it. How many of you have a big dog that thinks they're a small dog and they sit on your lap, right? Okay, same thing, right? It's like they don't know. It's not about who they are, it's about who they think they are. Or a better example, how many of you have heard of or know, or maybe you were a kid who's super smart, like super high IQ, but does terrible in school because their parents have told them their whole life that they're stupid. So they are not acting according to their IQ, they're acting according to who they think they are, which has been told to them since they were little. This plays out. It's not who you are, it's who you think you are that determines your behavior. That means who you think you are is really, really important. Really important. And I want to say, obviously, what you would want then is for your thoughts about yourself to line up with reality about yourself, right? You would want to think true thoughts about yourself. You wouldn't want to be off, right? So like the little dog that thinks he's a big dog could run into a big dog that knows he's a big dog, and that's not going to go well for the little dog, right? Like that kind of thing can play out in your life. You want your thoughts about yourself to line up with reality about yourself. So the question, do you know who you are? Now, you could dive in and try to answer that. But I think there's a question you have to ask before you ask that one to get that one right. Is that, you follow? If you just try to answer, who am I, without asking another question first, I think you'll probably get it wrong. There's a question that comes before the question. And the question before the question before I can answer who am I, you have to ask is, where do I look for the answer? Where do I look for the answer to the question, who am I? Because if you don't answer that, then you're just going to look wherever and you're going to come up with a different answer. So I think you first have to decide, where am I going to look for my identity? Where am I going to look for the answer to the question, who am I? Where are you going to look? Now, in Moana, sorry. As in most Disney movies, it gives the answer in song form, which I am not going to sing for you. However, when her grandma asks her this question, do you know who you are? She sings a song and she tells you where she's gonna find this truth. And if you've watched the movie, you know that her big place to look is inside of herself. That's what she says she's going to do. She says, the call isn't out there, it's inside me. She believes that her identity comes from her own self, that if she can do enough like self-reflection, that she will find herself in here. Matter of fact, if I may, as an expert, almost every Disney movie will tell you that. They all tell you that to find yourself, you need to look inside of yourself. That if you really want to know who you are, you need to do a whole lot of self-reflection. Look outside of Disney movies. I would say our culture's big message these days is to find who you are, you need to look inside of you. Listen to almost anything. That would be our culture's big message today. So here's what I want to do. I just want to ask, is that the best place to find that answer? Is that a really good place for you to look? If you're sitting here going, I actually don't know the answer to that question, I don't know who I am, or maybe I kind of do and I kind of don't, is the right thing for you to do then to start doing a whole lot of self-reflection? And will you come up with the right answer if that's what you do? Now, I will say, as with any major cultural narrative like that, there's some truth to that, right? I mean, it's a good thing to do self-reflection. It's a good thing to do some thinking about yourself. It's a good thing to know yourself, so to speak. But I want to ask, is it a good idea for us to use our own selves as the sole way to decide who we are? Are you really going to find it in here, the whole answer to that question? I want to propose that that's a dangerous thing to do. That if you're on an identity hunt in your life, if you're really struggling with the answer to the question, who am I want to caution you on only looking inside of you for the answer to that question. I want to give you two reasons. Two reasons why I think it's dangerous to look inside of yourself for the answer to the question, who am I? Number one. Now, listen. Both of these require for you to be really honest about yourself. So can you not lie to yourself? I don't care if you lie to the person next to you. Just don't lie to you, okay? Right now, in this moment. Later, don't lie to them. But right now, don't lie to you, okay? And don't elbow them. This isn't about them. This is about you. Okay, so, but I'm going to elbow my wife from a distance because she's not in here. But I definitely had fun with her first service. So here's the first thing. The reason you shouldn't trust what you find in here, number one, is that many times you have, I'm going to say it that way, you have contradictory desires inside of you at the same time. You want things that are opposites that actually oppose each other. Here's my example. A couple years ago, me and my wife started this running joke. I started this running joke. So what happened was she wanted to buy another Christmas tree, which is already a fight because I think one Christmas tree is enough. But we won't do that because I like having people in our church and I feel like that'll make you all leave if I start talking about how many Christmas trees you should have in your house. It's Father's Day, I can say that, right? Like, yeah, Father's Day, man. Anyways, she wanted another Christmas tree. I said, okay, that's cool. We're gonna put it in like our sunroom. So we start looking for a Christmas tree and she says, okay, I'm asking, what kind of Christmas tree do you want? She says, I want a tall Christmas tree. I was like, okay, we'll start looking for tall Christmas trees. So we start looking. And we're looking, and she goes, well, not that tall. Okay. Describe this Christmas tree that you see in your head more to me so I can help find this thing, right? And she's like, well, I want it to be skinny. Makes sense. The room's not huge, right? You don't want it to take up the whole area. So we start looking at skinny Christmas trees. And we're looking, and she's like, well, not that skinny. And this is where, I don't know if you can tell, I have a little bit of sarcasm. I kind of turn it on. And in the moment, we can look back on our laugh. Probably wasn't very funny at the time because I picked bad timing for some of this stuff. But I was like, wait a minute. So what it sounds like you're saying to me is that you want a tall, short, fat, skinny Christmas tree. And I'm clicking on Amazon, and there's no category for that anywhere to find a tree that is and is not at the same time, these different things. But it's funny because she did, in her mind, she saw this thing that did not exist. It morphed real time in her brain to be tall and short and fat and skinny at the same time. But so what has happened now is I use that as, I like to turn things into running jokes. So we use that as, and I use it for myself as well, as kind of our little tell to each other when we're having conflicting desires within ourselves, right? I will say, ooh, that's like a tall, short, fat, skinny Christmas tree. So for example, I both want to go on vacation with my children and without them at the same time. I want conflicting things. It can't be both. It has to be one or the other, but they're like my source of some of my greatest joy in my life, and they're the source of some of my greatest annoyance in my life. So I can't decide sometimes which one to go with. And you've experienced this too, right? If you're really honest with yourself, you have conflicting desires inside of you all the time, right? I want a 6-pack of Oreos and I want a 6-pack on my stomach, right? I want both. I want both. You want things that are contradictory all the time. And I even want to propose that it's shallow things and deep things in your life. It's not just the little stuff. You have contradictory desires all the way down to the depths of your soul. Now, here's what I think is ironic about that. When you have that happen inside of you, what you need to be able to make the decision is actually a strong identity. That will be the thing that helps you make the choice between the two conflicting desires that you have. You need to know who you are, and knowing who you are will then help you decide what to do. But hilariously, our culture now is asking you to base your identity off of your desires, even though your desires are conflicting. But if you allow conflicting desires to define you, then you're never gonna know what to do. Because you need that identity as the compass, as the decision maker in those times where you have those desires. So we're doing this backwards, upside down, inside out thing of saying that you should base your identity off of what's going on inside of you, while at the same time acknowledging, I want contradictory things sometimes. It's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. You need an identity to be able to make those decisions. So that's the first thing. First reason you should not look solely inside of yourself for your identity as a tall, short, fat, skinny Christmas tree. That's the first reason. The second problem with just looking inside of you, and again, you have to be honest with yourself, it's not just that you have contradictory desires inside of you, you also have desires that constantly change. Have you noticed that? That what you want doesn't stay? And it depends on your personality. Some of us are a little more steady than others, but what I wanted yesterday, I might not want today. And what I wanted last week, I might not want this week. And what I wanted last month, I might not want this month. And what I wanted last year, I might not want now. Like that happens, right? Your desires ebb and flow. They change, they flow inside of you. That's not a steady thing to base an identity off of, right? If you say this is who I am based off of a current desire that you have, and then next week it changes, you don't just change like a decision, you're changing a whole identity. And that, to me, doesn't seem like a good way to live your life. And here's a major problem with that. In the movie Moana, I don't care, we're doing it. You see this play out. Maui, the storyline of Maui is such a good one because if you base your identity off of how you feel on the inside, what you'll find is that you'll never persevere when things get difficult. That's gonna be for me, that's a symptom. If you can't persevere when things get difficult, that means for me, that's an evidence that you probably base your identity off of how you feel on the inside. Here's how that plays out. So for Maui, the demigod of the wind and the sea. Yep. You want to sing the whole thing? He was this titan, this figure, but then he made a mistake, then he failed, and the moment that stuff happened, because he was basing his identity off of these accomplishments and how he felt about himself, the moment things went wrong and he didn't feel good about himself anymore, he gave up. He couldn't do it anymore. Because what happens when you do that, when you base your identity off of your current whatever internal state, the moment you hit a difficulty, you're not gonna feel good about that, and you're gonna say, maybe I'm not the kind of person who can do that. That's where you go. You go straight to identity. You start to define yourself by your inability to do that thing. You go right there. And I just wanna say, think back. through like all the stories you've ever read in your life. You ever read a story about somebody who just gives up when things get hard? And like that's the whole story. Or the moment the road gets a little steep, they're like, let's go a different direction. Are those the stories you read? Or more likely, are the stories that you read when someone hits something that's difficult or someone fails in an area? What they do is they say, well, I know who I am, so even though I failed there, I'm gonna find a way to push through this. Aren't those the stories that you're magnetically drawn to? The stories where the person has such a deep sense of identity that failure doesn't get inside of them. Failure doesn't stop them. Failure does not define them. They push through because they see that that is not consistent with who they believe themselves to be. They're gonna keep going. Those are the stories that you want to read. Those are the stories that you want to be your stories, right? So again, if you're basing your identity off of what's going on inside of you, I feel like what's gonna happen is you're gonna fail and then you're gonna quit. You're gonna quit. Because you start to let the failure define you. It's not that you failed, it's that you are a failure. So, those are my two reasons for believing that looking inside of yourself for your identity is not a good way to answer the question, who am I? I just want to pause right here and ask you, could this be maybe why some of you are struggling with identity? Could this be why you're struggling with your identity? Because you're looking inside of you and you're getting contradictory information in here and you don't know what to do with it? Or you're looking inside of here and 1 week it says this and the next week it says this and you're pulling your hair out going, I don't know who I am. Because I keep looking in here and I keep finding different things and contradictory things. Could this be why you can't find a satisfying answer to that question? Could this be why you can't seem to go a long time in the same direction? That you keep changing course, adjusting the sails to the wind of whatever's going on inside of here? Could this be why you quit? When you quit? Because you're looking in here for your identity and this might not be the best place to find it? So I want to propose something. I don't think you should look inside of yourself as the sole way to find your identity. I'm not saying you don't look in there at all. I'm just saying that should not be the end. That should not be the final dictator of who you are, what's going on inside of you. There's pretty much only three places you can look, right? You can look inside, you can look out, and you can look up. So I've spent a whole lot of time trying to deconstruct this whole looking in thing because I think that's the major narrative of our day, that our culture's trying to get you to look inside of you. And I'm going to tell you, I don't think that's a great idea. I'm not going to spend any time telling you not to look out and look at what other people say you should be, because I think as a culture and generally we rejected that a long time ago. So I don't know that you're struggling with that. And generally I think if you are struggling with like letting people tell you who you are, you already know that's a little off. So I'll just give you the right answer. You should look up. You should look to God to tell you who you are. Did you see that coming? You're in church. I hope you did. So what I want to show you here is two pieces of scripture that I think are massively important to who you think you are. And I want you to, if I could get you to just absorb these, if I could put these things in pill form and make you swallow them, I would. Now, the reason I like these two is because they're about as far apart they're as far apart in the Bible as they can be. One's in Genesis, one's in Revelation. One happened before you were born, and the other is going to happen after you die. So I think this is kind of a cool concept to look at these two verses that happen on opposite ends of the spectrum of existence. Two verses that I want to say should be the starting place for you defining you, for the way you think about you. And I like it because they're on either side. So here you are in this present reality and you're looking backwards to before you were born to something to find your identity, and you're looking forward to after you die for something to find your identity. Two things, one in eternity past, one in eternity future, tethering you to now. I think that's a powerful thing. One has to do with origins and one has to do with destiny. And those are cool concepts. that used to be something in our culture. We were drawn to that more than we are now. Looking to origins and destiny as sources of identity. I think those are more powerful than you just saying, I just feel this certain way. I'm sorry, I shouldn't mock it, but like, to me, if I'm putting them up against each other and saying, hey, would you rather say origin and destiny define you or how you feel on the inside? I'm picking this one. To me, that's more compelling. It seems like a more reliable place to try and find identity than just looking inside of me. And maybe I'm getting old. I don't know. It's always worrisome. Like maybe the reason you think that is because you're old. I don't know. Do you guys think that? I'm almost 40, so that's like a thing now for me. Is it the reason I'm doing this because I'm old? No? Okay, whatever. Forget you guys. So, origin and destiny. Here's the first verse in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27 says this. Then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish of the sea, even the fish, and the birds of the sky, and the livestock, and all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. So, listen, God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. So in just 2 verses, you hear this little refrain happen over and over again. God created human beings in his image. In his image. He wanted you to know that you were created in the image of God. Now, if you've been a Christian for a while, this is one of those truths that tends to ping off of us, isn't it? You ever had that happen where it's maybe when you first heard it, it really was impactful, but after a while you just kind of get used to a truth and you don't let it really hit you where it needs to hit you sometimes. But this one needs to land. This one needs to land. Your origin story goes back to this. Now, how many of you messed around with like Ancestry.com or 23andMe or those DNA tests that kind of tell you stuff about your ancestors? Anybody mess with that? It's kind of cool, right? You find out a little bit of where you came from, and you find out a little bit of some of the truth from the past that maybe has an effect on you. And now listen, if you've done that, or maybe you know somebody who's done that, isn't it interesting that like whatever you find, usually you find a meaning in it? Like for example, well, I am making fun of it a little. Like if you find out you're like 7% Viking and all of a sudden you start like braiding your beard, you know, right? And you're like hanging an axe on the wall and you're like, I hope someone asks me about this, right? And then you even start to use it to explain stuff like that's my anger. It comes from the Viking part of me. You know, it's just deep. But like that's an extreme version, but don't you kind of start to do that? If you found out you had ancestors from a certain area, you're creating meaning out of that. I want to say that's at least a little bit valid, right? I want to say it's all the way valid if you go far enough back. Because if you would do Ancestry.com, like a supernatural one where you could actually go all the way back and you dig all the way back to the very, very deepest part of your ancestry, you're going to find Genesis 1, 26 and 27. That is your ancestry. This is where you come from. Let us make human beings in our image. In the image of God, he created them. In the image of God, he created you. You. Man, what kind of meaning will you make out of that? What does that mean? Your DNA's got a little spot in there that glows. Little heavenly spark somewhere inside of you that you bear the image and likeness of God in some way. If you're gonna say, I'm getting this tattoo because I found this out about my ancestry, you know, it's weird, but I have this tattoo about it. What does it mean when you find out that you are made in the image and likeness of God? What should that do to you? What kind of meaning should you create? This should be monumentous, right? And I think our culture likes these stories more than they want to admit. And again, I think our culture is going to push you to look inside here for your origin. But our culture accidentally loves these kinds of stories, origin stories. So for some of you, when Hagrid bursts through the door, knocks the door down and tells Harry, you're a wizard, you tear up a little bit, partially because you're a nerd, partially because that's a powerful thing for Harry to find out. His origins are not what he thought, and it means something to him in the present moment. Maybe that was the wrong decade. When Luke is out in the thing and Darth Vader says to him, Luke, I am your father. And that, first service, they're older. They really like that one. That changed his present reality when he found out his origin story. It's supposed to matter. It's supposed to impact you. When you think back, who am I? Well, at least a part of the answer is Genesis 1:26 and 27. You were made in the image and likeness of Almighty God. That's a starting place. That doesn't answer the whole question, but that is a starting place. Now, let's jump an age to the book of Revelation. Okay, little asterisk. This is a weird verse. I'm only going to focus on one part. I don't understand all of it. That's why I'm not going to talk about the rest of it. I was just going to say, do your own research. Maybe you shouldn't. It's the book of Revelation. It's a little dicey in there. It's Revelation 2:17 says this. Anyone with ears to hear must listen to the Spirit and understand what he's saying to the churches. To everyone who is victorious, I will give some manna that has been hidden away in heaven. No idea. This is the part I want you to see, this sentence right here. And I will give to each one a white stone, and on the stone will be engraved a new name that no one understands except the one who receives it. Whew. So that said, you're like in eternity, future, in heaven. Like Jesus walks up to you and hands you this stone that has a name, and it says it has a name that only you're gonna get. And to me, that's a moment right there, because if you think about that, how could you be the only one who gets it? Is this a language that only you speak? I don't think so. I think what that means is this name is going to perfectly sum up you in such a way that only you could possibly understand it on that level. He's just gonna show you this name, and it's gonna break you to see that the creator of all things sees you and knows you and loves you anyways. And it's gonna be this moment. You're gonna have a name that only you and Jesus know. I hope mine's cool. I don't know what it's gonna be. Somebody first service over here yelled out, it's Maximus. Okay, you like the movie Gladiator too much. That's all right. But what a moment that's gonna be. And to me, this speaks to destiny. The Creator God has a plan and a purpose for your life that ends in His presence. And that everything that happens and has happened, all going all the way back to Genesis, to your life, to then, that He had a direction for it. He had a plan for it. You're supposed to live in. So you have royalty inside your DNA, and you have a destiny in the presence of the King. Origins, destiny. Now the question is, what does that mean to you now? What do either one of these things mean to you now? Because you live in the messy middle, right? Maybe it's really messy for you. Maybe you're sitting here thinking, that's cool, awesome, I come from God and I have, this destiny to be in His presence, but you feel like crap now. Maybe just be honest. Maybe you've had a bad day, a bad week, bad month, bad year. Maybe you feel very far from living up to your royal spiritual DNA. So, in the movie Moana, indulge me one more time. I told you it was the greatest animated Disney movie of all time. And then I turned around and dunked on it for the whole sermon. You're like, just thought you liked this movie, man. Well, listen, it ends on a crazy note. So, it ends in a way that actually gets things perfectly right. And again, I almost feel like it's on accident. The antagonist storyline is perfect. This lava monster called Taka is terrorizing the world and just raging against the world. And at the end, Moana actually kind of switches roles in my head, and she plays a little bit of a Christ figure at the end. So she, in the way this plays out, she kind of represents Jesus perfectly at the end of this movie. So if you've seen it, you know, she gets to this island where she's trying to get to this whole time. She looks down to where she thought she was supposed to put this thing back, and there's nothing there. And then she turns around and sees the monster and realizes that this heart that she has in her hand is actually belongs to this monster that's been trying to kill her. And the whole movie kind of slows down. The sea parts, wonder where they got that idea, right? And this monster comes running towards Moana, and she sings this song. It's just a couple lines long, and I want to say this is Christianity summed up in a Disney song. This is part of the reason I love this stupid movie, because they get this so perfectly right at the end. Here's what Moana says. And tell me you can't hear Christianity in this. I have crossed the horizon to find you. That's Jesus. Jesus did the work. You were in your mess. He crossed the horizon to find you. Then she says, I know your name. This monster had no idea what it was, and it was raging against the world, and there's this calming effect of, I know who you really are. Not who you've been thinking you are, I know who you really are. And Jesus is saying that to you today too. They have stolen the heart from inside of you. That's all of us. And then she says, but this does not define you. This is not who you are. That's the story of Christianity summed up in a couple of lines of a Disney song. Jesus came down to find you. You didn't have to work your way to him. He came down to you. And this is the biggest part of Christianity that you have to get. Your identity is not achieved, it's received. Okay? 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, he made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. Jesus gives you your identity. He gives you his righteousness, his goodness, and he takes your sin onto himself. You receiving your identity is such a huge part of what we believe here. That means you don't work for your identity, you work from it. That Jesus came and he loves you right where you are. You don't have to climb up to heaven to get it. That means when you screw up, you don't have to freak out. You didn't work for your identity. You can't mess that up. He has declared who you are. You can't mess it up. And when you get it right, you can't be too cocky either, right? Because he gave it to you. Come on now. You can't be one of those Christians who walks around like, I receive grace better than you. That makes no sense. You receive your identity. So listen, person sitting here full of shame, person sitting here racked by guilt right now, person sitting here thinking they're not good enough, person sitting here thinking you're a failure. Man, you are deeply loved by the creator of the universe. You have royalty inside your DNA, and you have a destiny with the King. Start there. If you don't know who you are, start with those two things and build from there. Made in the image and likeness of God, future in the presence of that God. What does that mean now? Worship team, why don't you guys come out here, pray with me. Jesus, I pray for the person right now who's sitting here who, when I ask the question, do you know who you are, they do not. Maybe it's a time of upheaval right now. I pray that your love would steady them, Lord. I pray that they would be drawn to this. Pray that they would feel your love and your purpose in their life. Pray for the person who's never come to know you yet, Lord, that they would take a step towards you today. They would open up those lines of communication with you. They would start with asking you for forgiveness and just accepting your love. Lord, I pray for the Christian who's already made that choice and yet still does not live as if it's true. Pray for the Christian who's screwed up a lot lately. Christian who's living beneath who they are. Lord, I pray that you would imbue them right now with passion and purpose. They would feel your fierce love on them. They would know that when you died on the cross, all those sins that they're so worried about right now, they were all future sins before you'd even, you made the decision to die on the cross well before all that happened, Lord. It's not going to change your mind. They'd step into that. Instead of running from you, they'd run to you in that. Help us to know who we are, who you say we are. In Jesus' name I pray.